Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it is on course to achieve its 2030 target for reducing emissions.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland's emissions have halved from 1990 to 2021, and at the same time our economy grew by 57%, which I think is a fantastic example of how economic growth and decarbonisation are mutually inclusive and reinforcing. Scotland's 2030 target, which every party in this chamber voted for, was always extremely stretching. Indeed, the Committee on the Climate Change were clear at the time it went beyond what they would recommend. However, I will continue to push to meet our targets through direct action in Scotland and by working with UK Government, pushing them to take the action where that's needed.
Graham Simpson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but she didn't actually answer the original question, which was whether it's on course to achieve the target. It is a stretching target, and to achieve it would require an 8.9% annual reduction in emissions from 2021 to 2030. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, has she had any discussions with the Climate Change Committee on this, and what do they say about whether Scotland is on course to meet that target?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Committee on Climate Change are our statutory advisers on decarbonisation and indeed on the pathway to 2045. So, of course, I've had conversations with the Committee on Climate Change, both on our near-term and our mid-century targets. I am extremely proud of the progress that Scotland has made to date, but I am utterly clear-eyed about the challenges ahead, not least that very near-term challenge up to 2030. I'm considering all these matters very closely, particularly in respect of the need to produce a climate change plan, and I will update Parliament on any decisions that have been made in due course.
Okay, I've got a number of supplementaries. I'll look to take all of them. First, Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, we here all acknowledge the fact that while Scotland is tied to the rest of the UK, the progress of our emissions targets will continue to be impacted by events at Westminster. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore outline what impact UK Government policies such as rowing back in climate commitments and cutting Scotland's capital budget by almost 10% has had and may continue to have on Scotland's emissions targets and journey to net zero?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the rowing back on various critical policies by the UK Government, including the Prime Minister's announcements last year, have the potential to have a devastating impact on our environment, and I think, as was pointed out by many commentators at the time, demonstrate complete economic illiteracy. I think more than that, it's also inflicted a serious further blow to the UK's already diminished international reputation. And I have to also mention the budgetary settlement that Scotland has been handed, and in particular that almost 10% cut to our capital budget over the next 5 years from the UK Government. All of this, taken together, Presiding Officer, does rather point to a government completely unserious about the threat of the climate emergency.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Last year, it was revealed that Scotland had yet again missed its legally binding target for cutting greenhouse gas emission in 2021. I was glad to hear that the Scottish Government have accepted or partially accepted 99 recommendations made by the Climate Change Committee. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline exactly what progress the Scottish Government has made in implementing these recommendations to reach this 2030 target? Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I mentioned in response to a previous answer that I'm really proud of what this government has achieved in respect of decarbonisation, whether it's planting 75% of all trees in the UK and Scotland in recent years, £250 million investment in peatland restoration, 37% of our waters being within marine protected areas, having developed 4 low emission zones, having completed the world's largest round of offshore wind, floating wind. All of this has helped to contribute to the fact that we are now halfway to net zero. However, as I've also said, I'm very clear-eyed about the challenges ahead, and I'm considering all of that in respect to the development of the climate change plan.
Kate Forbes.
Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that a lot of businesses in Scotland are very keen to help the government meet that net zero target? And one of the things they hate more than anything else is when targets are shifted, like they have been under the UK government, that are more interested in winning elections than actually securing net zero.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think In terms of the trajectory for net zero, as with most things, certainty and a clarity on direction of travel is what business and investors seek the most. I would point to the coming together of the economy and net zero within Scottish Government as something which ought to give business great comfort in that regard. As far as I'm concerned, the energy transition is the era-defining opportunity ahead of us economically, as well as being an environmental imperative, and I'll continue to pursue that.
Maurice Golden.
Deputy Presiding Officer, when will the 2013 household waste recycling target be met?
Cabinet Secretary.
As Mr Golden knows, the Circular Economy Bill and Waste Route Map is currently progressing through parliamentary committees led by my colleague Lorna Slater. It looks across a spectrum of commitments that were made, some prior to the climate emergency, and looks to update that. And I know that he's part of the scrutiny of that just now. So insofar as he's not been able to ask those questions of my colleague Lorna Slater in committee, I'll endeavour to have a written update provided to him.
And Beatrice Wishart.
Sir, older inter-island ferries, of which Shetland has several over 40 years old, were not built with net zero targets in mind. Ferry emissions make up a large proportion of Shetland's emissions output. What assessment has the Scottish Government made on the impact of replacement vessels and short subsea tunnels to connect communities and reduce emissions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the suite of options for better connectivity for our islands is currently being considered as part of the Islands Connectivity Plan, led by the Transport Secretary, Fiona Hislop. Beatrice Wishart is absolutely right to point out the need to decarbonise our ferry fleet. I think that has to be, we have to recognise that there's a pace that can happen in line with the technologies coming on stream and being commercially available. This is something I'm currently discussing with my counterparts throughout the UK in respect of the emissions trading scheme.